Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sarah Platt, Child Nutrition Consultant with the Maine Department of Education's Child Nutrition Program, and welcome to our monthly webinar series. Today we're focusing on meal accommodations in school nutrition programs, what you need to know. There are two guidance memos from USDA, as well as their guidance manual, Accommodating Children with Disabilities in the School Meal Programs, which can be found on our website. During today's webinar, all attendees have been placed on mute. The webinar is being recorded so you can view it at any time. Certificates of attendance will be available on the last slide. You may screenshot or print the slide, depending on the format you are using to view the presentation. Now let's get started. For school nutrition professionals, receiving dietary requests can be pretty overwhelming at times. During this presentation, we're going to talk about the laws and regulations governing when you are required to make accommodations and when you may do so at your discretion. The objectives for this presentation are that you will become knowledgeable of school meal programs as they relate to special dietary requests, and become knowledgeable of the applicable laws to assure all children are able to fully participate in your school meal program. This presentation is based on USDA's guidance document, Accommodating Children with Disabilities in the School Meal Program. Again, this can be found on our website and is a great resource. In order to operate the National School Lunch Program and school breakfast programs, school food authorities, or SFAs, must enter into an agreement with their state agency. This is completed as part of the annual policy packet in NEO before the start of each school year. As part of this agreement, SFAs must comply with the United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA, regulations ensuring children with disabilities have an equal opportunity to participate in and benefit from the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program. Both federal law and USDA regulatory requirements protect the rights of children with disabilities to ensure they have equal access to benefits when compared with children without disabilities. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 prohibits discrimination on the basis of a disability in any federal government program that receives federal financial assistance. The Americans with Disabilities Act says that recipients of federal financial assistance must make reasonable accommodations to accommodate children with disabilities. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, requires each public agency to ensure children with disabilities have an equal opportunity to benefit from extracurricular services and activities, including meals. The purpose of 7 CFR 15B is to implement Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 as amended. And Section 9A of the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Act states that sponsors participating in child nutrition programs must make dietary accommodations for children with disabilities. So to summarize, school nutrition programs must make reasonable accommodations for children with disabilities which restrict their diet. And we must focus on ensuring equal opportunity for all of our students. So what is considered a disability? Federal law has defined a person with a disability as any person who has a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more major life activities, or has record of such an impairment, or is regarded as having such an impairment. These are examples of physical and mental impairments that may constitute a disability. In child nutrition programs, we commonly see food anaphylaxis, metabolic disease such as diabetes or phenylketonuria, PKU, as well as celiac disease. Major life activities, according to the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act, ADAAA, include but are not limited to those listed on the screen. In school nutrition programs, we commonly see disabilities which affect a child's ability to breathe and/or a child's major bodily functions. The 2008 Amendment to the Americans with Disabilities Act states that a major life activity also includes the operation of a major bodily function, including functions of the immune system, normal cell growth, digestive, bowel, bladder, neurological, brain, respiratory, circulatory, endocrine, and reproductive functions. After the passage of this amendment, most physical and mental impairments now constitute a disability. Here is a scenario directly from the USDA Guidance Manual. A child with autism is very sensitive to food textures and will only eat foods with a smooth texture. Must the school food service make a modification for the child? Yes. According to the ADA, any physical or mental impairment impacting the major life activity of eating is considered a disability. Some children with autism have sensory sensitivities and prefer food of a certain texture or color. They may require the same foods every day and need to maintain a regular routine. If a child's autism impacts their ability to consume programmed meals, the SFA must provide a reasonable modification. Now we're going to talk about meal modifications. Child nutrition programs must notify households of the process for requesting meal modifications, including that they do not discriminate on the basis of a disability, and who the individual is who is responsible for providing modifications, and the process for requesting meal modifications. Programs are encouraged to make the process of requesting a meal modification as simple and straightforward as possible. By making it clear how to make a request, you will increase the likelihood of getting the information you need and reduce the amount of confusion for both you and your families. Ways to do this are by including information about requesting meal modifications with your back-to-school packet, including information about modification requests in your student handbooks, and posting information about how to make modification requests on your website. The notification should explain to households when supporting documentation is needed. It is needed for meal modifications that do not follow the program meal pattern. The notification should also explain the requirements for the medical statement, as well as any timelines you may have. For example, if you need a certain amount of time to allow you to process the request and order any special products. And the notification should also explain to households the SFA's process for handling non-disabling modification requests. Certain physical or mental impairments require meal modifications that do not follow the required program meal pattern. In a disability situation, meal modifications outside the meal pattern are reimbursable as long as the request is supported by a medical statement signed by a licensed healthcare professional. If a modification request can be met and still follow the meal pattern, a completed medical statement is not required, but it may be helpful as it provides clear instructions around making accommodations, and it may discourage illegitimate requests. If a modification request can be met and still follow the meal pattern by offering all the required components, a completed medical statement is not required. But again, it might be helpful as it provides clear instructions around making accommodations, and it may discourage illegitimate requests. An example would be an allergy to one specific fruit or vegetable, where the SFA can simply substitute another fruit or vegetable in the meal. Oftentimes, requests for accommodations consist of a brief statement. These usually don't contain sufficient information to make the request and therefore would be considered incomplete. The medical statement must provide clear instructions telling you specifically how to make the accommodation. The written medical statement is no longer required to use the term disability. However, it must list sufficient information about the child's impairment to allow you to understand how that impairment restricts the child's diet. It must also list an explanation of how to make the accommodation and the food or foods to be omitted and or substituted from the child's diet. There may be cases where more information may be required, and you would need to work with the family to get more information. Remember, the goal is to ensure that a safe meal is provided for the child. The medical statement must include the signature of the individual who is authorized to write medical prescriptions under state law. In Maine, this includes a medical doctor, an osteopathic doctor, a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant. A sample parent letter, medical statement, and milk substitution request can be found on our website as a resource for you. You are not required to use these specific forms, but they may be helpful to make sure you get a complete statement with enough information on how to make the requested accommodation. If the child's IEP or 504 plan includes the information required in the medical statement, or if the SFA obtains written medical verification of the impairment during the IEP or 504 plan process, it is not necessary for the SFA to also obtain a separate medical statement. To fully understand and implement the medical statement, you need to work with a team of people, which may consist of the school nurse, the district's 504 coordinator, the parent, and possibly the student. Communication is essential. If the medical statement you receive is unclear or incomplete, you will need to follow up with the family to get a completed statement. While waiting for the clarification, this should not delay you from providing the modification. Move forward with the information you have. Remember, the goal here is to keep the child as safe as possible. Medical statements need to be kept on file to document meals claimed outside the meal pattern. Be mindful that medical information is confidential. To discontinue meal modifications, written notification is strongly recommended, and it does not need to come from the medical authority. Question: is a food intolerance recognized as a disability? A food intolerance may be considered a disability if it substantially limits a major life activity. For example, if a child's digestion, which is a major bodily function, is impaired by gluten intolerance, their condition may be considered a disability, regardless of whether or not consuming wheat causes severe distress. Meals must be served for free or at a reduced price to children who qualify for meal benefits, regardless of whether or not they receive a modified meal or a regular meal. You may not charge children with disabilities any more than you charge other children for program meals. If the meal modification is specified in the IEP, special education funds can potentially be used. Once a disability determination has been made by the licensed healthcare provider or through the IEP 504 process, SFAs are required to provide reasonable modifications to prevent discrimination on the basis of disability. Reasonable modifications to effectively accommodate children with disabilities must be made on a case-by-case basis. A meal modification must be related to the disability or limitations caused by the disability. Some common requests you may receive in school food service are requests to accommodate food allergies or food anaphylaxis, to make portion size or texture modifications, as well as milk substitutions. Once an SFA becomes aware of a child's allergy to a specific food item or food items, the SFA should monitor ingredients carefully to protect the child's safety at all times. The modification would extend to any food items and ingredients offered to the child. When accommodating a child's food allergy, no food item offered to the child may contain traces of substances that may trigger an allergic reaction. For example, if a child has a peanut allergy, no food served to the child may contain peanuts or include peanuts as an ingredient. This means food labels or specifications on food items children with allergies will consume must be checked for allergens. If a food label for a product served in the program does not provide adequate information, it is the responsibility of the school food service program to obtain the information necessary to ensure that no allergic substances are present. This may be accomplished by contacting the supplier or manufacturer. In general, school food professionals should exercise caution at all times, ensuring proper storage, preparation, and cleaning techniques are used to prevent exposure to allergens through cross-contact, and should not serve foods to children with severe food allergies if the full ingredient list of a food product is not available. The Institute for Child Nutrition, or ICN, has resources on their website, including food allergy fact sheets, as well as a sample SOP for serving food to students with allergies. Here's another question from the USDA guidance document. The regular menu item for lunch at the local middle school is whole grain rich pasta with cheese and vegetable toppings. Must the school food service director prepare whole grain rich pasta with lactose-free cheese and vegetable toppings for a child with lactose intolerance? No. In a disability situation, the meal modification or meal item substituted does not need to mirror the menu item offered each day. The SFA's responsibility is to serve the child a safe meal that accommodates their disability, not to mirror the program meal served that day. In the example used in this question, the SFA would not be required to serve a whole grain rich pasta dish and could instead serve a different meal that meets the child's modification request, such as a sandwich with whole grain rich bread. A meal modification request may include portion sizes exceeding the minimum quantity requirements set forth in program regulations. When specifically prescribed in a medical statement, you must provide the child with larger portions. In other situations, a medical statement may prescribe portion sizes below the minimum quantity requirements set forth in program regulations. Again, you are required to follow the direction of the medical statement and must provide smaller quantities. In some situations, the medical statement may request a particular brand of a product as a substitute. For example, a medical statement for a child with gluten intolerance may request a specific brand of gluten-free bread. If a modification request indicates a brand name item, in most instances a generic brand is sufficient, unless the brand name is medically necessary. This can be determined through the interactive process with a child's parent or guardian. In this example, if the medical statement lists a specific brand of gluten-free bread, the SFA would check with the family to see if it would be safe and appropriate for the SFA to provide a different brand. In this instance, the family could then affirm the brand name change. Offer versus serve allows students to decline some food components or food items while selecting a reimbursable meal. However, asking a student to use offer versus serve as a way of meeting the accommodation is not an allowable way to make a meal modification for a child with a dietary disability. Children with disabilities must have the option to select all food components or items made available to other children. For example, a child who has celiac disease or a gluten intolerance must have a choice of a bread or grain item that is gluten-free. The SFA may not use offer versus serve to eliminate a specific food component for a child with a disability. In this case, the SFA must offer a grain substitute for a child who cannot consume gluten. However, using offer versus serve is acceptable for preference requests, for example, a vegetarian meal. Dietary accommodations pertain to reimbursable meals only and do not apply to a la carte foods and beverages. The SFA is not required to provide meals when meal service is not normally available to the general student body. Special seating arrangements may be required. However, programs should provide the most integrated setting appropriate to the person's needs that allows children with disabilities to participate along with children without disabilities to the maximum extent possible. It is important to communicate with the family so as to balance the safety of the child with inclusion. Some children may need to track their dietary intake. For example, diabetic children must track their carbohydrate intake. To accommodate a diabetic child, a medical statement may require an SFA to provide nutritional information for food options made available to the child. The SFA is not required to provide all nutrition information for all program meals, as it would be very burdensome to provide this amount of information. In order to meet the child's need, the SFA could develop a cycle menu with the child's parent or guardian, the school nurse, and possibly the child if age appropriate. Nutrition information could then be provided for the foods on the cycle menu, as opposed to all foods offered through the programs, reducing the burden on school food service. Here's another question. A student has a medical statement signed by a licensed physician stating the student has celiac disease and prescribes a gluten-free diet, including foods to be eliminated and foods to be substituted. Does the school food service need to accommodate this request? And the answer is yes. Celiac disease affects a major life activity, bodily function, and therefore rises to the level of a disability. School food service must accommodate the physician's diet prescription. And now we're going to talk briefly about non-disability situations. So far, we've addressed accommodations for students with disabilities which affect their diet. You may also receive requests for dietary accommodations that may not qualify as a disability, such as food sensitivities or dietary preferences, such as vegetarian or vegan requests. Schools may choose to make accommodations on a case-by-case basis, but are not required. For non-disabling requests, the accommodations must still follow the meal pattern, meaning you are offering the required components or items, and you may use offer versus serve to make the accommodation. SFAs are encouraged to consider children's cultural, religious, and ethical preferences when planning and preparing meals. Accommodating children's preferences helps to maintain your participation. Variations, whether on an experimental or continuing basis, must be consistent with the requirements and program regulations in order for meals to be eligible for reimbursement. Any acceptable milk substitutions must still meet or exceed the nutrients found in cow's milk, as listed on the slide. Meeting the nutrient requirements helps to ensure participating children continue to have access to important nutrients found in cow's milk: calcium, protein, vitamin A and vitamin D, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, riboflavin, and B12. SFAs will not receive federal reimbursement for a meal that substitutes juice or water for milk for a non-disability reason. However, if a child's medical statement includes the child cannot consume milk due to a disability, the request the child receive a substitute, the SFA must provide the requested substitute regardless of whether it meets the nutrient requirements. Acceptable fluid milk substitutions are lactose-free cow's milk, which is still cow's milk, but the naturally occurring lactose sugar is removed, and approved soy milk beverages that meet or exceed the nutrients found in cow's milk that were listed on the previous slide. Again, in non-disabling situations, juice and water are not allowable substitutions as they are not nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. Here's a question. A parent requests the school provide whole milk or reduced fat 2% milk. Is this an allowable milk substitution? And the answer is no. The USDA requires that schools serve only low-fat, 1%, or fat-free, also called skim, milk. At the core of managing dietary accommodations is a partnership with open communication for all involved with the child's care. It is essential for SFAs to work with parents and guardians to ensure the child receives a safe meal and have an equal opportunity to participate in the programs. Involving parents and guardians early in the process allows you to develop rapport with families and prevent miscommunication or misunderstanding. In addition to the guidance manual that you may find on our website by USDA, there are additional resources available to help you navigate meal accommodations. The Institute for Child Nutrition fact sheets, as mentioned earlier, and the CDC and School Nutrition Association have resources available as well. And don't forget, we are also available to assist. Each situation can be unique, so don't hesitate to contact the Maine Department of Education Child Nutrition Programs if you have any questions. The School Nutrition Association released their magazine for October 2018, and it focused on dietary accommodations. It also has some recipes available. So if you are a member of the School Nutrition Association, this magazine is also a great resource. This last slide is your certificate of attendance for viewing this webinar. You may enter a half hour for your hours of training. Make sure to print the slide and save it with your professional standards documentation. Thank you for your time today, and have a great rest of your day.